Welcome back to another edition of Force Friday, where we talk about Star Wars theories, characters, concepts, comparisons, analyzations, collectibles, and more. And today we're going to kind of talk about some failed lines that we've seen pop up in the collector universe for Star Wars, because for everything that's been a great success, like the Black Series or the Figuarts run or the Hot Toy stuff, 3 3/4 of course being legendary, there are plenty of ones that do not continue or do not sort of hit their target in regard to their intentions or goals as relating to their success. When the Black Series began in 2013, it was sold as a 6-inch figure line and nothing else. Hasbro specifically said the plan was for 8 to 12 figures per year, with no plans for sail barges or Death Stars. Despite a few hiccups, the core line has gone from strength to strength, becoming one of Hasbro's most popular 6-inch lines and delivering what could arguably be considered some of the best 6-inch figures ever released at domestic retail. However, since 2014, a pattern has emerged. Sublines that last a couple of releases before inevitably being clearanced and canceled. We've had 3 different vehicle price points. We've had titaniums, statues, and most recently the extremely short-lived hyper-real line. So why is this? What is Hasbro's strategy here? Why do they keep pushing out these lines despite a prior lack of success? In order to figure that out, we'll take a look at each line and we'll start with accessories, or at least discuss which each one was about. At Toy Fair 2014, Hasbro announced their first major jump in the Black Series, Deluxe sets. These sets would consist of one figure and a small vehicle or creature that would come in a large window box package and retail for $40. 2 were announced, a Jabba the Hutt with seamless moving mouth and a speeder bike with the Biker Scout. Later that year, into 2015, we saw 2 follow-ups with Luke Skywalker and a Wampa plus Han Solo with the Tauntaun. Despite the heavy original trilogy focus and reasonable price point, this line quickly became majorly clearanced and was discontinued in 2015, which I can tell you from my point of view is a huge bummer. But Hasbro's reasoning for attempting this line was obvious. They wanted to introduce another price point into Black Series, and vehicles and creatures are a huge part of Star Wars. The speeder bike with Biker Scout was an extremely well done set and now goes for huge prices on the aftermarket. But the same can't be said for the remaining 3. Hasbro released a limited edition Jabba at SDCC as an exclusive, only this version came with the hookah pipe and Salacious Crumb. The standard retail figure was just plain old fat Jabba in a big old box, with that empty space dwarfing the figure inside. The Hoth sets had notoriously poor paint applications, and the paintwork of the Tauntaun were extremely substandard. Not terrible, but for a line then in its infancy and only managing about 15 figures a year, it was probably a misstep. I do think that the sculpt work on both the Tauntaun and the Wampa stand up. Then we got the titanium. In 2015, we saw the Star Wars relaunch with The Force Awakens. It was a big year for Hasbro and the Black Series. This year was really when Hasbro stopped marketing the Black Series as just the figure line and as a brand representing what they deemed to be collector-oriented premium products. That's why you see the Black Series on helmets and their FX lightsabers. In the mid-2000s, Hasbro had success with a line of titanium Star Wars vehicles, small die-cast pieces at a low price point. Hasbro revealed this line for 2015 and released 33 vehicles, a mix of stuff from The Force Awakens, Rogue One, and the saga. This line was short-lived. By the time Rogue One came out, it was on its last legs, churning out a couple already in development before it was quietly canceled. Early 2016 saw another titanium line released, 2 packs of helmets, die-cast, and in the 1/6 scale, selling for $14.99 a pop. Hasbro managed to get 10 of these out until the line fizzled out in 2017. Again, it was quietly canceled. Neither of these were bad by any stretch. The titanium vehicles were well made, very detailed, and super collectible. They all came with stands and only ran about $5 a pop. The helmets made cool little desk pieces and had the collectible quality, but they came out at a time where retail was flooded with Star Wars merchandise of every description. They might have been a bit too niche or just lost in the shuffle, but they were heavily clearanced and didn't last long. I, however, managed to get a set of 2 because Robert Detoff buys me meaningless Star Wars stuff every chance he gets. So I have Phasma and a First Order Trooper sitting firmly on the corners of a Detoff. We also have to talk about that TIE Fighter. Now, we've talked about it a few times because it is always going to be a historic piece, but we're going to talk about it today as well. Before we go any further, got to address it. Hasbro took big swings with the Black Series in 2015, pushing it from a few waves a year to the main Star Wars action figure line. The vehicle price point was clearly one they wanted to crack, and so we got it. This big 25 by 20 by 20 First Order TIE Fighter, and it had an opening 2-seater cockpit, swiveling turret, and came with a pilot. But in what I'm sure is going to be be good news for many of you, bigger doesn't always mean better. This thing retailed at $180, and to be frank, doesn't do anything. No light-up features, nothing interactive, just two gigantic plastic wings and a cockpit bigger than a football. It's too big to pick up, the cockpit is well detailed but could use more paint, and the wings came with warping issues. This thing was an enormous flop for Hasbro. Massive amounts of these were clearance for as low as $40, and a rumored Resistance X-Wing was then canned. Next up, we have the titanium figures. By 2017, Hasbro had 3 failed Black Series sublines. None of them had been bad, but the message seemed to be fairly clear. The support wasn't there. Previous years had seen Hasbro retire 3 3/4 super articulated at mass retail, and 2017 marked the 40th anniversary of the Star Wars brand. Collectors were hungry. So imagine collectors' disappointment when Hasbro unveiled the 3 3/4 titanium figures. Miniature statues with maybe 3 points of articulation, recreating iconic moments from A New Hope for $14.99 a pop. They got out 2 waves, one of the core cast of A New Hope and another with 4 characters from The Force Awakens. The whole line is honestly baffling. There's a clear pattern here. Relatively inexpensive collectible items, stuff you could have on your desk at work. But these were pretty awful. Paint apps and facial sculpts range from decent to terrible, and the figures included effect pieces like swooshing blades that looked extremely cartoonish. Not only that, Hasbro thought it was wise to put out a 3 3/4 figure for $14.99, only $5 less than a 6-inch figure. This whole line was just ill-conceived, and as per usual, it clearanced heavily, lasting less than a year. And a sculpture of this size, with the poor sculpting, articulation, and cartoonish effects at $14.99 is not what a collector wants when they've been screaming for more hyper-articulated figures and have been willing to pay the same price point. I'm not sure what the angle was here, but let's move on. September of 2017 brought us Force Friday for The Last Jedi, and Hasbro pushed 2 new Black Series sublines. Centerpiece 6-inch scaled plastic statues that could also act as mini dioramas for the Black Series figures, and the vehicles and creatures range, plus a new, larger price point that came with the figure. Centerpiece really seemed to take inspiration from Hasbro's previously Unleashed line from the 2000s, but less exaggerated. The vehicles and creatures were just that, but much better in quality than the 2014 line, bringing excellent releases like Luke's Land Speeder and the Dewback with Sand Trooper. Centerpiece was fairly heavily promoted by Hasbro, and there might even have been talk about Marvel Legends centerpieces if the line did well, but it did not. $50 is a lot to ask for a 6-inch plastic figure and a base, even with some light-up features, and Hasbro managed to get 4 releases out before the line was canceled less than a year later. Vehicles and creatures, meanwhile, got a very good reception from collectors but failed to move sales. Only 4 were released across 1 year, and all of them can be found for less than retail fairly easily. Yet again, a regular retail line for Black Series focusing on vehicles had failed. The final and latest line to apparently be canned is Hyper Real. Announced at Toy Fair in 2019, Black Series Hyper Real figures are an 8-inch scale figure featuring a metal endoskeleton, which gives them some good weight. The figure's garments are all made of a specially developed silicone material for a seamless, quote-unquote, Hyper Real look. These hit shelves for $79.99, with Vader landing in October and Luke landing last month. From the offset, no Migos, these had an uphill battle. Black Series is now incredibly popular and has really made itself the foremost Star Wars action figure line. A whole new scale wasn't popular with many fans. The idea here was clearly to capture the Hot Toys market, or perhaps tap into something that Mezco had been doing, and the price tag matched specifically for Mezco. But this line was a bad idea for retail. Your average Joe who buys a few bits here and there isn't going to pick up Hyper Real Vader and consider why he would be more expensive. He's just going to see only 3 inches more plastic for 3 times the price. Selling these in Walmart was a bad idea. The Vader was pretty excellent for what it was. Between both, it's obvious Hasbro put a ton of R&D into the development of the endoskeleton and the silicone material, and for the most part, it really paid off with that Vader. But we know Hasbro can do armored characters. The test came with the human likeness, and Luke was not cut of the same cloth, so to speak. The shiny head sculpt, rubbery bodysuit, and widespread reports of tearing have really hurt this guy. Add to the fact that the Vader was clearance despite its quality, and you have a pretty clear recipe for failure. I don't know if it's been officially confirmed, but it's pretty much being assumed by everyone that the line is done. I hope that it's not, because I do feel as though there is merit in that line, and I do like both figures displayed on my shelves. They actually do have a pretty strong presence, and they're pretty fun to pose. For me, ironically, they are the posing figures of my Star Wars collection. Most of my Star Wars collection is posed pretty stoically, or perhaps dramatically, but without great range, whereas these figures pose very easily and give a sense of action in every pose I've put them in. So let's wrap this thing up. What do we draw from all this? Firstly, that Hasbro is keen to push the Black Series as a brand to denote quality, something aimed at a collector or adult movie fan. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, they want to plug the holes, so to speak. If Hasbro sees another company doing a Star Wars product that's successful and feasible at retail, you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to try and corner that market. We've seen everything from desk items with the helmets to the kind of Mezco Hot Toys market. You would think that they would get the message, but it isn't as simple as that. As mentioned in a previous video, up until recently, the license fee for Star Wars brand was astronomically high. These terms were acceptable to Hasbro a few years ago, but not anymore. For better or worse, Marvel is pretty much the king of the toy aisle. And while Star Wars is undoubtedly still popular, it just isn't the action figure and toy king it once was. It's got company at the table. So Hasbro was fairly quickly stuck in a situation where the royalties were so high that Disney may have been making more off Hasbro products than Hasbro. Now that's just speculation, of course, but it's educated speculation coming from Jedi Temple archives and makes a lot of sense. So Hasbro needed to make every penny they could off of this brand. If they saw a market, they had to get it. Now the deal was recently negotiated, apparently with much fairer rates for Star Wars stuff, but it's not just about that, it's about legacy. Since the 70s, Star Wars has been a never-ending gold mine of toys. It's changed action figures forever in the 70s and 80s, dominated toy aisles in the 2000s, and has become one of the most profitable franchises of all time. There is no movie, no show, no franchise that is as important historically or financially to merchandise than Star Wars. Hasbro is very much well aware of this. Things change year by year, but for all its ups and downs, Star Wars has never failed to stop giving for Hasbro. It is the giving tree of the toy aisle. So if it's covered by the license and it's financially feasible and it can fit on a retail shelf, you can bet Hasbro's going to try it and they're going to keep trying it. And who knows what they're going to do now with Hasbro Pulse or HasLab. Hope you guys are staying safe. Hope you guys are staying sane. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.